Guys, welcome back to my channel. This video is going to be a bit long one because I'm tackling how to get a H1 in English, and there's so much we can do and we can talk about in English because it's such a huge course. So let's not drag this video long, but before we do that, please follow my Instagram, like this video, subscribe, and comment down below any questions you have or any more video suggestions you have. Now let's get into this video. If you ever see me looking down, that's because I have my notes down here because there's so much to say. I'm just going to be looking for references and whether I missed a point or not. So before I jump into giving tips about getting a H1 in English, I want to preface this by saying that I personally didn't get a H1 in English. I got a H2 in English, but I worked really hard to try to get a H1, and I hoped to get a H1, but I ended up not getting. So I'm hoping that these tips might help you whether you want to get a H1, H2 or H3, that these tips will maybe open your mind to other things that you might not be paying attention to. So English paper is divided into two papers. There's paper 1 and there's paper 2. Paper 1 is usually seen to be an easier paper. In that sense, there's nothing much to prepare for, as everything is new every year and there's only like a comprehension and a composing and a question B to do. But in reality, paper 1 is actually the harder to get marks in because it's actually testing your English abilities and your ability to write a really good answer on the spot. So it is an easy paper to prepare for, but a harder paper to get good grade in. Paper 2 is all about poetry, your Shakespeare, your comparative. It seemed to be a bit harder to prepare for since there's so much to learn, but if you do your learning, it's easier to get marks in paper 2 than paper 1 because you've done all your study beforehand and there's nothing much to do on the day except answering the question. So paper 2 is about literature testing and how much you have studied English in the sense of novels and literature. Before I jump into tips specific to paper 1 and paper 2, I want to give some general tips. English paper is very time sensitive paper, and I really hope that people understand this because a lot of times you end up not doing well is because you never got the time to get to that last question, to get to that unseen poetry. I want to tell you to start preparing timing wise for English paper. For me, that will be actually practicing more papers and practicing questions under time conditions and trying to make sure that whenever you're answering an English paper, you are actually keeping time in your mind. And also you can give each and every question a certain time limit and you can only spend that much and then move on to the next question. That will make sure that you're giving each component the time they deserve and you're not losing on marks by not even answering a question. Another general tip is to cover your material. A lot of people do not study for English and then end up not getting a good grade and wonder, why didn't I get a good grade in English? English is just like any other subject. Some people think of English as just like maths, where it is so hard, you have to be good at it and you can never do well. For me, I always tell people it's just another subject. You can prepare for it and you can learn to do well in it. So at least cover your materials. At least you know in that sense that you are covering all the questions and you're not left to, maybe not know what question and not get marks because you didn't cover your material. Another thing that I would recommend for both papers is planning your answer. Before you jump into answering the questions in the paper, please take 5 to 10 minutes to plan each and every answer out. I cannot tell you how many times I've started doing a Shakespeare question and in the middle I realized, oh my god, I could have mentioned this about Hamlet, or I could have mentioned this about King Lear. That would have not happened if I had actually planned my essay, and I would have made sure that I'm only putting my best points and leaving out irrelevant points and I'm not missing a point. So please, before you jump into the paper, 5-10 minutes for planning. And I know that seems a lot because English is very time sensitive, but 5-10 minutes can actually save you so much time when you're actually not stuck looking for points because you've already planned out all your points beforehand. Another thing for English is I really recommend people to make their own notes, and I know that is so hard because there's so much. If you cannot make for everything your own notes, at least have your own twist or your own personal statement for every component of English. For example, for me, I really enjoyed Sylvia Plath, a lot of interactions with her mental health and her confessional style of poetry. So I will always bring in my own struggle with her mental health or my own personal connection with Sylvia Plath. So that helped examiners see that I'm not just another reader who just read Sylvia Plath, read the teacher's notes and just regurgitated those notes onto the paper. I've actually understood Sylvia's poetry and I've actually engaged with it, and now I'm giving you my own opinion about it. And be careful not to do everything about your own opinion, but adding a bit of your own 1 or 2 sentences will really help bring your marks up. Another thing for both papers is to start learning words, especially linking words. That will really help make your essay go up. Another thing is learn how to write a good answer or a good essay. That includes learn how to format your essay. There should be an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. But all of them have to be connected. You're not going to jump from one point to another. If you do that, it seems very unplanned and it seems like you don't know what you're talking about. A good student who has a good understanding of their text and good understanding of what the question is being asked will be able to interlink points and will be able to interlink paragraphs. If you put more effort in, you will see the results. But also be realistic. English is one of the subjects where the standard from junior cert to leaving cert is quite high. The jump is quite big and it's a bit harder to get a H1 in than, for example, physics. Like, I know that is weird, but I personally think it's easier to get a H1 in all the sciences, even maths, than English, because the standard for it is so much different. They're not just requiring to give normal English essay that's scratching the surface of the text. They want you to engage with the text and actually bring your own understanding and go a bit deeper into the text. Also, English is very subjective, so what one examiner thinks is a good answer might not be the answer that is good according to another examiner. And that really becomes the downfall of English, because it really makes it harder to know what answer actually deserves really good marks. So we can't really focus on what the examiner might like, because we don't know what the examiners are. We can just focus on the things that are guaranteeing to give us marks. Everything else is all about our likes, to be honest. Now let's jump into paper 1. Paper 1 is not that time intensive as paper 2, in my opinion, because it is much easier in the sense that it's only comprehension, question B, and composing. And these components, if you are not going to put any effort, seem to be the component that you don't need to study for, because you can just do them on the day. But believe me, they actually require as much effort as paper 2, maybe even more. But first tip will be to really practice paper 1, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart. And I think that was one of my downfalls, was I did not have enough time to practice more for paper 1, and I think that's because I was also doing the HBET, but who knows, I really would have wished to have spent more time on it. Another tip is to edit. That is especially important for composing. Once you have figured out what your favorite composing question is, for composing I recommend practicing different essay styles and then picking the one or two that you're the best at. For me, that was personal essays and descriptive essays, so I stuck with them and I tried to improve more in them rather than spreading myself onto 5 different essays and not doing well in all of them. I wanted to focus on the ones that I liked and the ones I knew if I practiced more would actually give me more marks. So I also recommend doing that. If you have a few styles that you really like, go with them and stick with them and improve in them. Secondly, if you write a composing essay, start editing. Don't just leave them, oh, you just got 2019 composing essay, you did it and you just did it for the homework and the teacher gave you got a B and you just left it. No, I recommend go back and edit your answers and see why didn't you get a H1, and add in the components that were missing, so that when the time near the exams come, you have this really good H1 essay paper that you can learn and not memorize, just learn and see what language you use and maybe try to replicate that on the day. Also, paper 1 always has a theme every year. Don't forget to look at it. I always forget that because it's at the start of the exam and exam paper, so just keep that in mind, because a lot of the questions inside will have that link to that theme, and if you can answer your question and maybe bring in the theme, maybe that will help you improve your grade as well. And the new thing that when I did my leaving cert in 2018, they started bringing in paper 2 component into paper 1 comprehensions. So a lot of times the question A will have 1 or 2 questions from the comprehension and the third question will include paper 2 question. Don't think, oh, you don't have to study for paper 1, because it seems like paper 2 has started to come into paper 1. For paper 1, I always recommend picking question B first and then picking question A, because you can't do the same questions in the same comprehension, so that will actually help you decide what question you want to do. And this tip I will recommend for all English paper is read other answers that got H1. You can find them online, you can find them if somebody in your class maybe had a good H1 essay, read them. Ask them politely and read and see why they got the H1 and you didn't. And then don't be afraid to adapt those components in your essay. Don't steal and don't copy and paste, but adapt, meaning that you take the component they got right and maybe put your own twist on it and adapt it in your essay. Another thing for composing is understand what style you pick. If it's a personal essay, understand what makes a personal essay. Is it your confessional style, whether it's your personal pronoun, whether it's personal anecdote. You need to understand if you picked personal style or if you picked descriptive essay, what makes it that, and then learn those language techniques, because as much as it is just doing it on the day, there's so many components you can learn beforehand that can make it easier for you to then do it on the day. One of the things my teacher also told me is to learn quotes. I will have list of quotes on different themes. For example, on freedom, on religion, on personal fight, mental health. I'll have these really generic and really powerful quotes for each broad category and learn them so that I can apply them on the composing, because that can make your essay so much better because you have another reference. Also, don't just drop in the quote. Like, please learn to link it. Don't be just talking about bread and then start quoting Gandhi. There has to be a link so that the examiner sees you're not just putting in the quote for the sake of putting on the quote. Number 2 has poetry. It has Shakespeare, which is, for me, I think of it as Shakespeare because I only did Shakespeare for that question, but it is like a full text question. And then comparative. Some people do Shakespeare for comparative. For poetry, I made notes because I think making notes for poetry is so much easier than other components, and it is a very high yield topic. Like, the notes you're gonna make, if they're good enough, you are gonna get a good grade. The way I made notes is I made poetry grids. So I'll pick my favorite poet and then I will pick my favorite poems from that poet. And in every poem that I picked, I would usually pick 4 or 5, but I will learn like 3 or 4 really well. Like, I will not spread myself too much. I think learning 3 or 4 is enough. And also make sure you learn them really well, not just like surface level. In every single poem, then I will have 10 to 15 lines that I will really dissect and break it down to their component. For example, there's one verse, and then I will break that verse down and break it down into what language technique is in this verse. For example, if it's a simile, or if it's a metaphor, if it's an imagery, if it's an allusion, what is it? I will break it down, and then I will break it down into comments on that line. And those comments, I will usually get them from different places, and usually they will be poetry books and my teacher's notes or online. By doing that, you're bringing so many different points from different areas that make your answer unique, and is also going to help you go deeper. And what I mean by go deeper is not to just scratch the surface level that every other person does, but actually bring in your own angle and your own interpretation of the poem as well. And if you do that for the whole of the poem with each and every sentence that you have picked, you are literally guaranteeing yourself really good marks, because those questions, those notes are really concise and precise. And learn them. I learned those grids, and poetry was my highest marked answer. For unseen poetry, the biggest problem that happens with it is lack of timing, because we usually leave it to the last minute. We have only 20 or like 15 minutes to answer it, and the answer, like in my experience, was always like really half-baked because I never had time to go deeper in it or to plan my answers. And I think you can really improve your marks for poetry, unseen poetry, if you can time manage your paper really well. For the Shakespeare question, or for the full text question, if you're not doing the Shakespeare, I recommend really learning the quotes. They are really important. They become the foundation of your answer, because you are not going to be able to answer really well if you can't give references of what you know and what you don't know. So first thing is first, compile a list of the most important and most relevant quotes and learn them. Secondly, break down the text into characters, themes, and language techniques, because these things make up the text. After you have learned what the text is all about, break it down into what main characters are there, what their roles are there, what do they signify, what do they symbolize. Same for themes. What does this text teach us, or what is this text talking about? Hamlet, it was a lot about madness. It was a lot about innocence. It was a lot about justice and lack of justice. So we really focused on those themes. And then language techniques could be how Shakespeare uses imagery. Well, that could be any author, but for me that was Shakespeare. How he uses imagery, how he uses symbolism. And by really breaking down the text into these components, you make sure you're covering all kind of possible questions. Also, I recommend making your own essays on them if you have time. If you don't, then maybe add your own personal statement, 1 or 2 sentences in every notes you have. Another thing is be able to write a good amount in this question. I know a lot of people will tell you if you have 2-page answer that answers the question, it will be enough, but the reality is a 2-page answer will not answer the question, because the question usually has multiple layers. And if you have done your material really well, the problem wouldn't be that you cannot do more than 2 pages. The problem will be how can you do only 5 or 6 pages, because there is so much we can talk about. If you are done your preparation really well. I recommend having a medium length, so 4 to 5 pages, and try not to go over it or try not to go less than that, because you want to give that proof that you know your stuff. And the less you have, the less proof you have, and the more you have, the more you're telling them you don't exactly know what you're talking about. Again, you are trying your best to stand out as a candidate, as a student, so you have to give them proof that you know what you're talking about, that you're different, and that you have what it takes to get a H1. Another thing that I found really helpful for this part of the English paper was adding critics quotes. I think that can really bring another angle to the answer. And I had for Hamlet and Frank Lear, because I did them like twice, I had a full list of critics talking about Hamlet, whether they liked Hamlet, hated Hamlet, talking about different components of Hamlet, characters, themes, and I think you can bring it in and then integrate it really well with the essay. That can really bring a new angle to your answer. Last but not least is comparative. That was not my best answered question. I did not like comparative that much, just because of how much it asks you to do and how much kind of nobody knows how to teach you comparative. Not even the teachers, no offense to them, but I don't even think the examiners themselves know what they're looking for frankly. But I think comparative is a huge beast that it really needs a lot of time to tackle, and sometimes we don't have that time, especially if you're repeating. So for comparative, the 3 texts you have chosen, it's not as important to know them deeply as single text, but rather as comparing them. So you need to know more about how they are according to each other, how do they relate to each other, how similar they are, how different they are, what contrasts them, what is the highlights between them, and then be able to answer the differences and similarities. That is more important than how much you know one text really in depth. Another thing is comparative questions are really mean and really hard and annoying. I hate them, and they are huge, and it's so easy to get lost in them because they're asking for 5 different things in one question, and you need to be able to break down that question into its different components and be able to answer all of them, while also simultaneously comparing 3 texts. Yep, it's a huge task, but I hope if you can put in effort and understand what they're actually looking for, you get the grade. But frankly, I don't even know what they're looking for. What really will really help you for the comparative answers is learning comparative language. That includes how can you compare 2 texts or 3 texts. So in contrast to, or in comparison to, in similarity to, likewise. These words can really link your paragraphs and link your different essays. Again, learn the quotes, but the quotes are not that important. So you don't need as many quotes as the single text, but you need enough to show that you know you're talking about. Generally 3 quotes per paragraph is seen to be a good marker for that, but if you have more, it's okay. But it's more about comparing the text rather than showing how much you know about a single text. Every year it's different topics for comparative, either it's theme, language, I think, and cultural context. That's also important for you to learn. What are they comparing you in? Like what mode? So learn more about those modes. And honestly, for this question, I really hope that you can put in the effort, because I frankly don't know. I'm sorry. So last but not least, I have some like my own personal experience with repeating English, because a lot of people have this question about how I repeated English. First of all, English is one of those things where every year the course changes. So if you're repeating your leaving cert, it is one of those demons that you have to conquer, because everything is new from what you did 2 years ago or like a year ago. For me, I got a H2 the first time and actually maintained my grade and got a H2 the second time. So I think that was an achievement for me. I didn't go down, but I wanted a H1, so whatever. But for me, that was an achievement just to maintain my grade, because honestly, even that was hard. My tip for it, to learn the material. Again, it's so much easier to get a higher grade if you know what you're talking about than if you don't know what you're talking about and aiming for a H1 or H2. And that's what I did. I learned my poets, I learned my comparative, I learned my single text. And because I knew I could learn these things, I had a better chance of getting good grade in paper 2. And paper 1, I was trying to practice for it, but I knew I didn't have that much time, because it's a 1-year thing. You have to do it all in 1 year, and I had a HBAT as well. I maximized my points in paper 2. Secondly, I'm somebody who likes memorizing things. So for me, memorization was not a big deal. Well, it was a big deal, but it was something easier. And I think there's a lot of memorization in English. If you think about it, there's a lot of quote memorization, there's a lot of themes, there's a lot of characters. So if you can learn to memorize and put it into your long-term memory, that would really help you. If you're not good at cramming or memorization, then I just really recommend starting everything early for English and not leaving it to the last month or 2 months, like me. But don't do that if you know you're not good at memorization. Third of all, notes. For English, if you cannot make notes, you should get your hands onto good notes. And it is not hard in this time, because there's so many resources online and there's so many ways you can get notes. There's few books that I had, and I had some online resources as well that really helped me minimize my time spent on making notes. And if you can do that, then it's very good. But I also recommend personalizing those notes and putting in your own opinion. That would really bring your marks up. So yeah, that's how I tried to do it when I was repeating. I really focused on the new things. For example, the comparative and the single text really changed for me. I really focused on that. Poetry I already enjoyed a lot, so I didn't have that much problem learning poetry. So I think it's a lot about learning what you're good at and maximizing that, and also if you're not good at something, putting more effort into it, because you know you don't want to fail because of that one thing. For resources, I use a lot of Google. I will just type in, for example, Hamlet characterization when it comes to madness. Well, for repeating, I did a King Lear. So for King Lear, I will just write in the question and then like find notes and compile them. There is this Spark Notes, there is a 65 points website, and there is this book that comes up every year, but it has like paper 2, everything in it. I think that is very good, especially for single text if you're doing Shakespeare. So yeah, I hope you like this video. I know it's a bit long video because there's so much I can talk about English in English. And if you have any more questions, please don't hesitate to comment down below or DM me on Instagram. And if you have any new suggestions for videos, and subscribe and comment and like and whatever you have to do. But I see you in the next video. Bye.